David, I'll start with you. Your reaction to this essay and the timing.
I don't think it's a helpful intervention for Rishi Sunak, and I don't think ultimately it is an adequate explanation of what happened and the mistakes that Liz Truss made last autumn. I don't think there's a recognition that fundamentally what went wrong was that the international markets lost confidence in the economic credibility of the UK government, that they had put us on an unsustainable path in terms of borrowing because of the tax cut announcements. And that resulted in market turmoil that eventually brought her down. And I don't think that Liz Truss has yet sort of fully accepted that she was pursuing a policy that damaged our credibility, lost market confidence, and for that, she has to accept responsibility.
Julian, your reaction to this piece. I mean, did you help Liz with this piece at all, Julian, just to start with?
No, I didn't actually. I think I saw it pretty much the same time that everybody else did. But if I had been asked to help, I would have written pretty much the same piece. I think her explanation of what went wrong is fundamentally correct. I think it's also good that she flagged up some things that went right. So the fact that the government provided significant amounts of help with people's energy bills, very important for households and businesses. I think it was right to reverse the increase in national insurance contributions, and it's quite significant that the new government has kept that on. So there were some things that went right as well. Most importantly, I think she's right on the fundamentals, that we do need a rethink of the direction of economic policy here. It's not just about fiscal policy, it's also about supply side reform. And I think that's the most useful thing from this intervention, is that we are again having this debate, whereas this debate hasn't been taking place over the last few months.
And look, David, is there something in that? Because, throughout this piece and the conversations around it, there is the truth that growth has been stubborn in the UK for a long time. And there were some measures in the mini budget that were popular. Obviously, cutting taxes were popular with some people, but things like easing some of the planning laws, some of the simplification of tax rules. I mean, for example, some aspects of IR35 that the CBI welcomed, lots of things in the mini budget. The Institute of Directors was pretty warm about the mini budget at the start of it. Have we thrown everything out in haste? Is it worth revisiting some of those individual ideas within the mini budget and the concept that we are going to have to do something different to try and stimulate growth?
Well, it's certainly the case that the lack of economic growth that we face at the moment, particularly compared to our international competitors, is a real cause for concern. And absolutely, a sensible government needs to be wrestling with why that is happening and what can be done about it. The problem is that many of the measures that were announced just added uncertainty to the UK economy and were damaging for growth. I actually think that when it comes to the composition of our taxes and the taxes that we have put up, we could do this in a more growth-friendly way. So I have a little bit of sympathy for her views on corporation tax, for example. But that's about composition, not the aggregate. There just isn't scope for us to reduce the aggregate level of taxes in this country at the moment, I believe, because of pressures on public spending. Some of her measures on planning, for example, I'm sympathetic to that. But if we're looking at growth, planning is part of it. I'd love us to sort of be pursuing the Oxford to Cambridge arc more enthusiastically. But I'd also point to things like the uncertainty that is caused by a potential trade war with Europe over the Northern Ireland Protocol, uncertainty caused by the retained EU law bill, the difficulties caused by no longer having high levels of European migration to this country. And of course, it's now harder to trade with the EU. So some of those policies are not ones that Liz Truss would be advocating. But yes, do we have to be serious about growth? Yes, but just promising big tax cuts, but leaving our public finances on an unsustainable footing isn't going to bring us long-term growth.
And Julian, in the sort of pursuit of growth, we are in a situation where we're just at the beginning of last week. The IMF predicted that actually we're going to be one of the few countries that is going to do really badly with our growth. And Liz Truss's time has contributed to that, has it not?
Well, no. First of all, I haven't yet met a serious economist who understands what the IMF is forecasting, because on the one hand, they've revised up the forecast of pretty much everywhere else, and on the other, they've revised down the forecast for the UK. So there's a fundamental inconsistency there. To the extent that it could be blamed on what's happening in the UK, I think it actually vindicates what Liz Truss was going to do. If you go back to October, the IMF actually said at the time they didn't have time to incorporate the new budget measures, but that they said that they would boost growth in the near term, albeit at the cost of complicating the fight against inflation. What's happened since then is that taxes have risen further than they would otherwise have done, and also the government has signalled it's rolling back some of the energy support. So those were the things that have prompted the EU to revise up its forecast for the euro area, but go the opposite direction for the UK. So if anything, I wouldn't give take the IMF's views very seriously.
But Julian,
but
you
if
will
anything,
you will
they've vindicated Liz Truss's approach.
but you would concede that Liz Truss's time, her short time, her 49 days as Prime Minister, hasn't helped the economy. It hasn't helped businesses in this country. It hasn't helped people who've seen their mortgages go up or perhaps lost their mortgage offer. Would you concede that, I mean, she wasn't great for the UK economy?
Well, clearly it ended badly, and Liz Truss herself and also Kwasi Kwarteng have conceded that they made mistakes, underestimating the vulnerability of the financial markets. Presentationally, a lot of it wasn't great. And I think also Kwasi Kwarteng went a bit too far in the mini budget itself. Most of the measures in the mini budget were already anticipated by the market, certainly all the expensive ones. But he went a bit too far with unexpected cuts in personal income tax on top of that. So there's certainly handling problems. But as Liz Truss said in her article, there's a danger that her government becomes a scapegoat for all sorts of problems, so actually nothing to do with her. So if you look at mortgage rates, for example, they've risen across the developed world. I mean, there've been just as big an increase in mortgage rates in the US, for example, for similar reasons, which is central banks returning interest rates to more normal and sustainable levels.
David, do you want to come back on that this is not all Liz Truss's fault? Things were going pretty badly anyway.
Well, it's certainly the case that it's not all Liz Truss's fault, and to some extent, what might have been long-term damage hasn't happened because there was a change of path. We took a different direction. Had Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt not provided the reassurance to the markets that they have done over recent months, then the chances are that our interest rates would have gone up even higher. Our mortgage rates would have gone even higher. It looks as if they're going to sort of peak at 4%. It could have gone up to 6.5%. And then there needed to be a change of course, and the direction that we were going in could have made matters much worse. As it happens, I'm not sure that much long-term damage has been done by it, but only because she only lasted 49 days. And had they sort of stuck to the path that they tried to set out on the 23rd of September, then I think more damage would have been done. But I think if you're looking at long-term damage, I'm afraid some of the implications of Brexit are now becoming very clear, and I think that is going to do much more damage to the UK economy than anything that Liz Truss did in her brief time as Prime Minister.
And Julian, another thing I just wanted to pick up with you is Liz Truss is very damning about the Treasury. She talks about the pessimism and the scepticism of the Treasury, and she says that things were dismissed because they were not politically deliverable. Things like deregulation of financial services and other industries was viewed as undermining the prospects of a deal with the EU. I mean, that's all important functions for officials to do at a government department. Officials are not there to be your cheerleaders and just acquiesce to everything you say as a government minister. They are there to give you accurate, honest, sensible advice. And you as a minister of all, whatever your political persuasion should be, to listen to your officials, to not be a maverick or take dangerous risks that imperil people's lives or their businesses or their mortgages, especially without a mandate from the public. I mean, I feel like she's sort of on the one hand saying all the officials were very computer says no. On the other hand, she then says nobody warned me about these LDIs.
Well, I mean, two separate points there. First of all, on the LDI problem, I think that is a very significant part of this story. I mean, it's clear that there were going to be some problems in the market as a result of what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were doing, but they were made far worse than they would otherwise have been by those problems. And if either the Bank of England and other regulators had been on top of those problems in the first place, or warned Liz Truss and her team that they were there, then things may have ended very differently. So I think that's a very important part of the story that we shouldn't ignore. As to the opposition from the Treasury and other institutions, I'm not personally a huge fan of this sort of left-wing conspiracy narrative. But if left-wing means that you're a fan of a sort of a big state with high taxes, high spending, and high regulation, that does seem to be the direction of travel of the UK. And that's very much something that Liz Truss and many others, including myself, would want to push against. So if Treasury orthodoxy means high taxes, high spending, lots more regulation, then I think Liz Truss is absolutely right to challenge that. And if she continues to do that, I think that's a good thing.
But what about the Treasury, let's say, through the Osborne years? You couldn't say that the Osborne years were some sort of left-wing utopia. There was a lot of austerity, there was lots of spending cuts, and there were some tax cuts as well. So it's not true to say that the Treasury is always some left-wing conspiracy.
Yes, well, so I wouldn't personally use that language, but surely the lesson from the Osborne years is that that's a failed strategy. The sort of austerity, whether it's through big spending cuts or big increases in tax, is not the way to grow the economy. And that's something very much that Liz Truss recognised. She was trying to get us away from this doom loop of higher taxes, weaker growth, worse public finances, and even bigger increases in taxes. And I think one of the other things she very helpfully did is identify some of the problems with the Office for Budget Responsibility here. Now, like most economists, I'm a fan of the idea of an independent fiscal watchdog, but not necessarily a watchdog that is effectively running the show. And the way that we've relied too much on rather dodgy 5-year forecast from the OBR to set policy now. And then we end up in this odd position of the OBR's forecasts constantly being changed and policy constantly having to change in response. I think that's a problem that she correctly identified.
Now, David, we're just coming to the end of our time. I mean, Julian and, of course, Liz Truss in this very long piece make the point that the core principles of conservatism is to be low tax and small state. And that's why many people choose to join the Conservative Party or vote for the Conservative Party. It's really central to their political philosophy. And they have seen a Conservative Party which over time has been taxing people more and has definitely increased the reach of the state. Does she, and indeed Julian, have a point that actually maybe many Conservatives want the Conservative Party to do conservative things when it comes to fiscal policy?
Well, there's also another Conservative tradition, which is fiscal responsibility, which is trying to make the sums add up in the long term. That actually was the tradition in which Margaret Thatcher operated when she was Prime Minister. She was prepared to put up taxes when she first came into office in order to get the public finances under control. And I think that is a really important Conservative tradition, and one that was largely abandoned by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng in their brief time in office. And what we saw was that sort of loss of confidence, which means that people don't actually end up with more money in their pockets. What happens is that interest rates go up, people pay more in their mortgages, and the economy is constrained in that way. And I just think the idea that there is a sort of easy and straightforward route to economic growth by always cutting taxes. Yes, of course, the size of the state is an issue about making sure that public money is spent wisely. It's really important. But the idea that just lowering taxes is the route to strong economic growth hasn't been demonstrated in the UK, hasn't really been demonstrated elsewhere. And I think that's a simplification of the Conservative approach to the economy. and not one that leads to wise government.
Well, thank you so much. Just read a message that's coming. Lots of messages. People really enjoying this conversation. Someone's messaging saying, really, really good debate from both your contributors. But I don't hear any good discussion about Liz Truss as a CEO. She failed to manage risk. She failed to consult, and she failed to motivate. Julian, just before I let you go very, very quickly, because you've worked with Liz Truss, you know her quite well. Do you think she might want to try and have another crack as leader at some point?
Oh, I honestly don't know. I mean, to be clear, I helped advise her during the leadership campaign and helped the Truss team, but I wasn't involved, for example, in the details of the budget. Indeed, it would be inappropriate for an outsider to be involved in those sort of informal discussions. And I haven't spoken to her more recently either about what her future plans is. But I would very hope that somebody with her experience, including some bad experience from which she's clearly going to try and draw the lessons, could continue to have a significant role in public life.